Good morning, students. I hope that you and your family members would be all right by the grace of God. Students, since you know that because of coronavirus, the whole country is under lockdown, but students, in even this scenario, the teaching learning process cannot be stopped. We therefore have prepared some online classes for you, students, in which we are going to tell you various details about various chapters. So, this is the first day of your online classes. Since you are in class 11, there are two books you might have known. The name of the first book is Hornbill, and the name of the second book is Snapshot. Today, we are going to discuss the first chapter number 1 in the book Hornbill. The name of the chapter is The Portrait of a Lady, and the author is, you might have heard his name, students, and the author is Khushwant Singh. Khushwant Singh is a very famous Indian English author. Let us start the first chapter, The Portrait of a Lady. Well, students, at the initial half of this chapter, Khushwant Singh has described the appearance of his grandfather as well as the appearance of his grandmother, saying that his grandfather's portrait hung over the mantelpiece. He was an old man. He would wear a big turban. He would have a long white beard. And thereupon, he has described his grandmother, saying that his grandmother, she was always been short and fat and slightly bent. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. And she was very religious by nature. And the author further says that when they used to live in the village, there was a great bonding between him and his grandmother. During that period, their parents they would live in the city, and during his stay in the village, his grandmother used to wake him up in the morning, and they would both go together to the school because the school was attached with the temple. The author has further described that my grandmother and I were good friends. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for the school. She said her morning prayer in the monotonous sing song while she bathed and dressed me up in the hope that I would learn and get to learn it by heart. The author says that though he would hear the prayer of his grandmother, but he never bothered to learn the prayer. You know, students, since the children are very naughty, and the author further describes that they would together go to the school. Before going to the school, his grandmother would feed him the stale chapati, and the same chapati, same stale chapati she would carry for the village dogs. It means she was not only very religious, she was very kind by nature as well. While the author would read his books in the school, his grandmother, she would kept herself busy in reading the scriptures. It clearly indicates that she was very religious by nature. Now, the author further describes that when my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us. Now, this was a turning point, students. When the author's parents they were settled in the city, they called for Khushwant Singh and his grandmother. Now, the author described that that was a turning point in our relationship. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to the school with me. You know why? Because in the city, the school was not attached with the temple. The author further says that I used to go to the English medium school in a motor bus. There were no dogs in the streets, and she took to feeding the sparrows in the courtyard of our house. Now, this highlights something about the character of her grandmother, that she was very kind by nature. As the years rolled by, we saw less to each other. Now, the years they kept on passing, and the author he became busy in studies. For some time, his grandmother continued to wake him up in the morning, When he would come back from the school, his grandmother would ask him some questions about the school and the teachers, and she would often get disappointed. You know why, students? Because as long as the author was in the village, the medium of teaching used to be in Hindi or in I would say Punjabi, but ever since they came in the city, the medium of now teaching would used to be in English, and the author's grandmother could not understand anything about the teaching in the city. Moreover, she would ask, I would tell my grandmother English words and the little things of Western science and the learning and the law of gravity and the principles and the earth being round. This made her unhappy. You know why? Because these things were over the comprehension of his grandmother. She could not help her grandson in doing the lessons now. She could not help him in doing the chapters. She did not believe in the things they taught me in the English school and was distressed that there was no teaching of God in the city school. As I just told you that his grandmother was very religious, and she would expect that some religious things would be taught in the city school, but it would not happen in the city school, and probably on account of that she would get distressed. She would feel unhappy that why there is no teaching of God in the city school. That would made her unhappy. Now the author further describes that uh, she was very religious. She would sing her prayer all the time. Her lips they would remain constantly busy in the inaudible prayer, and she would count the beads of rosary all the time. Now the author further describes that when he went to the university, he was given a room of his own, and during that time, the common link between them was almost snapped because his grandmother could no longer stay with him. He was given a room of his own over there, and she rarely left her spinning wheel at the time. Now she accepted her seclusion, students, because her adorable grandson went away from her, and the grandmother accepted that seclusion bravely. Now there came a new phase in her life, students. From the sunrise to sunset, she would sit beside the spinning wheel and she would recite the scriptures, the religious prayers. Only in the afternoon, she would feel relaxed for some while she would feed the sparrows. It means that is how she would keep herself busy, while hundreds of little birds they would collect round her, creating a veritable bedlam of chirping. Some sparrows they would come and perched on her legs, while some were on her shoulders. But she would never get angry with them, or rather, she would give them a mild scoldings. It means she was very very fond of the pets, very fond of the animals and birds. Thereupon, there came one more turning point, students. When I decided to go abroad for further studies, I was sure my grandmother would be upset. You know why? Because there was a deep bonding between them. I thought that Khushwant Singh thought that he would away from her country for 5 or more years, and he did not expect that when he would come back, he would be able to meet his grandmother then. But her grandmother was brave enough, students. When I told my grandmother that I was going abroad, my grandmother she did not show or demonstrate any emotion. She came to leave me at the railway station, but did not talk or show any emotion. It means she was very brave. She was very brave. Her lips moved in prayer constantly. Her mind was lost in the prayer. Her fingers were busy in telling the beads of rosary. Silently, she kissed my forehead. Look at now. There is a very emotional farewell between the author and his grandmother. His grandmother kissed him on his forehead, and the author cherished this moment for a long, long time. But the author did not expect that when he would return his home for 5 long years, he did not expect that he would be able to see his grandmother because she was terribly old at the time. But the author was wrong in his perception, students. When he came back from abroad, completing his studies, he found that his grandmother was the same, saying that when that was not so. After 5 years, I came back home and was met by my grandmother at the station. She did not look a day older. Can you believe, students? She still had no time for words. While she clasped me in her arms, I could hear her reciting the prayer. It means she did not change herself at all. The same religious perception. Even on the first day of my arrival, her happiest moment was with the sparrows, whom she would feed at the daytime. And so far, students, I hope you have understood the essence of the chapter. Now, this is what of which I wanted to tell you today. Now, the next part of the chapter, I will describe the second day, students. Now, I have some work for you. Now, on the basis of your reading of the chapter so far, you're supposed to find out. You are supposed to find out the character sketch of the grandmother, as well as you are supposed to write down a few lines about the grandmother and the author and the protagonist Khushwant Singh. Okay, students, now that is all I want to teach you today. Now, the next part I will cover in the next class. Goodbye. Have a nice day.